Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show. Eric Metaxas is one of America's most widely read authors and commentators on planet Earth. And it is a high honor to have him as we celebrate and kick off our 250th anniversary. His latest work, known as Revolution, The Birth of the Greatest Nation in the History of the World, examine the extraordinary events, ideas, sacrifices, and faith that gave rise to our great nation. And so, as we approached this monumental anniversary, realizing we're still a babe in the woods, he joins us to discuss the miracle of America's founding and why its lessons remain relevant today. We welcome him to our broadcast house. Eric, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's my honor to be with you, Armstrong, and I appreciate where you're coming from. This nation is not some other nation. This is a unique thing in the history of the world, and I think we need to appreciate that. That was not my goal in writing the book, but in doing the research, I was overwhelmed, honestly overwhelmed.
You know, it's interesting you chose the word revolution for the title. And what makes, Eric, the American Revolution different from virtually every other revolution in history?
Well, this is something I also didn't quite understand, but I mean, a lot of times people say, oh, the American Revolution, as though you need the adjective American. There's only been one successful revolution in the history of the world, and that's the American Revolution. It's the only true revolution that succeeded. All the other revolutions end up looking like jokes or sad tragedies. The French Revolution ended in a bloodbath, and then they said, oh, we hate the king, so we get rid of the king. What do they get instead? A dictator who crowns himself emperor, utterly fails in its, noble mission to say, we're going to give the people the power. It didn't work out that way. The Bolshevik Revolution, infinitely worse than the French Revolution. The Chinese Maoist Revolution. These are just uprisings, but they end up taking more power from the people instead of giving the power to the people to govern themselves. The American Revolution is undeniably unique. And I think most people, myself included, are really hadn't been aware until I did the research and wrote the book of how extraordinary it is. We really owe a great debt to the men who died. Many died and suffered so that we could have the liberties that most of us take for granted. So we shouldn't take those liberties for granted. We need to know the story. And when I wrote the book, I said, I just want to tell the story. I'm not trying to make any point. But in the course of telling this epic story, I learned a few things. Let's put it that way.
You call America the greatest nation ever in the world.
Yeah.
Man, that is unbelievable. What specific evidence led you to that conclusion?
Well, the success of our revolution, there's a real humility in our revolution, because the founders, they understood something, and I mean, they all understood it. And we have forgotten this completely. And in doing my research, I said, this is not escapable. This is not deniable, that they all saw themselves as going back to the Sinai covenant, like the Israelites in the Sinai wilderness. They escaped from Pharaoh, tremendous bondage and oppression under Pharaoh in Egypt. They escape, thanks to God, doing some miracles. And they are now free to govern themselves. And they don't choose an earthly king. They very clearly say, God is our king. We are under God. And if we behave well, if we are righteous, God will bless us. And if we don't, he will not bless us. And so they had a covenant relationship. All of our revolutionary figures were looking back 3,000 years earlier to that idea, which had never been tried in history. They thought, could we do that here on this continent? Could we have a nation conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal? These are outlandish ideas in history. And when people act like, oh, well, there's no, oh, well, these are wild ideas. And they succeeded, I would say, by the grace of God, because the odds were dramatically against them succeeding. And it's a story that we should know, especially if we're privileged to live in America. We need to know this story and the stories that comprise the story.
Eric Metaxas is our guest for the full half hour. I'm Armstrong Williams. Don't go away, and we'll be back. Author of Revolution, the birth of the greatest nation history has ever known, Eric Metaxas. It's interesting. Many Americans know the names George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin. They know those names, John Adams, but who are we often at the expense of acknowledging those that made us who we are today, that are overlooked and deserves greater recognition?
Well, first of all, I will say that John Adams needs infinitely more recognition than Thomas Jefferson. People always say Jefferson after they say Washington. Jefferson should be like 9th or 10th. It's a strange thing. And I kind of write about that in the book, not to take away from Jefferson, but John Adams was a towering figure that there should be a gigantic monument to him in Washington, D.C. It's bizarre that there's not. And he ends up being a very central figure in my telling, which was not intentional. It just ends up being the truth. But his second cousin, Samuel Adams, a giant, that man, he was called by all of them the father of the revolution. Without him arguing for liberty from the 1740s onward. So he is an absolute giant. Other figures, Dr. Joseph Warren, oh my goodness. The fact that most Americans don't know that story, I'm embarrassed over and over when I discover this stuff. I think, how did I not know this? Shame on me. Wow. So I feel this burden to tell everybody about Dr. Joseph Warren. He was the leader of the movement who was killed at Bunker Hill in June 75. He was killed at Bunker Hill. They thought, how can we go on without Dr. Warren? Joseph Warren was the leader. Well, it reminds me of the death of my friend Charlie Kirk. You can't get your head around it. How can somebody so young, so central? But there were so many of these great men at that time. Paul Revere is another figure that we kind of think, oh, he rode a horse. Oh, no. He did so much. He ran the spy network that made it possible for us to defeat the British. I mean, you have to think of figures like John Hancock, another one that I didn't really know the story of John Hancock. He was absolutely central in the whole thing. These figures in Massachusetts and Boston, they made this happen. And they were all dramatic Christians. And that story, again, it's not going to be told in the universities. I certainly didn't learn it at Yale. They're kind of pushing this narrative, this French Enlightenment narrative that, they were deists. That is not true. And I was really astonished at how untrue it is, at how overwhelming the Christian faith of these figures is, how central that is to what they were doing. I honestly was unclear.
Let me probe you here. What role did faith in religious conviction play in our founding?
Yeah, it is so overwhelming that I was just stunned, because I've been told like, oh, well, some of them were Christians. Listen, I mean, here's one example. August 1st, 1776, all of Congress is the next day going to sign the official it's called the engrossed version of the Declaration. August 2nd is the big day. They're going to sign this. They're going to sign their death warrant. The day before, Samuel Adams on the steps of Independence Hall in Philadelphia gives a sermon to Congress, gives a speech to Congress where he says, we have this day restored the sovereign. He is saying to Congress, what we've just done, we've declared independence from an earthly king, George III. but we are declaring dependence on God, who is our king, just like the Israelites in the Sinai wilderness. That is a message given to Congress. It's not to his Bible study group. It's just to Congress. Over and over, you see this kind of language. And I thought, why aren't we learning this in schools? This is true. Even if you don't like it, it's true. It's history. We need to know our history. And everywhere I look, George Washington was profoundly serious about his Christian faith. I've always been taught, oh, he was a deist. He's as far from a deist. It's preposterous because he had the view that Samuel Adams had and John Adams had, and most of them had, that we are in a covenant with God. If we behave well, if we behave righteously, God will bless us. If we don't, he won't. They took that very seriously. And I'm thinking, it's one thing to give lip service to your faith. It's another thing to live by faith and to act on your faith and to say, we will not stoop to the barbarity of the British to win. We're going to fight God's way. That is just dramatic faith in action. And I've never heard that. I'd never known that. And I thought, this is everywhere. I mean, I tried to not write about it too much because I'm not writing a religious book. I'm writing a history book. But it is inescapable that these founders were motivated by Christian biblical values, that the whole narrative, even for the least religious, for Franklin and for Jefferson, they all got the narrative. This is the narrative. And that's something that, needs to be understood because it is central to how we get our liberties. If you like liberty, this is how you get liberty.
Inextricably connected to faith and God. Eric Metaxas is our guest. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. This is really fascinating as we celebrate our founding, remembering those that history did not remember, and celebrating that America is still founded on faith in God. And without God, America will eventually learn we can become nothing. And it's like someone rudderless on the ocean. It's like a bird without their wings. But you write in your book that America was an unprecedented experiment in human liberty. What made the American Revolution, Eric, fundamentally different from every revolution that came before it?
It's precisely what we've been talking about. They knew we are under God. We trust in God. He is our sovereign. All of these other so-called revolutions not only didn't trust in God, but sneered at God or despised the idea of God, the Christian God of the Bible. When you think of the Bolshevik Revolution, when you think of the French Revolution, after they killed the king, they killed all the priests and nuns. They were radically anti-God, anti-clerical. The same with the Bolsheviks. All the communists hate God, hate the idea of God. And the point is, this kind of sounds like a math problem, right? It's like, okay, we're going to get rid of this kind of government. It's like, okay, what are you going to replace it with? Well, if you don't replace it that we're going to be under God, you're replacing it with chaos, and you're going to get more of the same or far worse. And in each case, it's worse what they got. So our 13 colonies were dramatically Christian. And again, people know the history. It's that, why did all these people come across the ocean, risking their lives, to this continent? Well, they came because they were being persecuted for their Christian faith, and they wanted to go someplace where they could be left in peace to worship God along the lines that they felt are, consonant with the Bible. And they couldn't do that in Europe. So they went to this wild place. And the fact of the matter is that, it's not true of all of them, but most of them, and they were free to govern themselves. And as the years pass, they're thriving. And I think of Boston in particular, and Massachusetts in particular, when the British, circle back in 1760 and say, oh, you got to pay us these taxes, or, they thought, wait a minute, our rights come from God. We've been governing ourselves. By what right do you come to tell us that we owe you money or whatever? This is, we got to do this right. We're not going to be bullied just because you're the mother country and you've got the big guns and we don't. And the principles, the Christian principles of, especially in Massachusetts, it's really dramatic. They took this seriously, and they all believed that if God is not with us, we won't win. And we don't want to win if we're not with God. I mean, they really were serious about this. And I'm talking about the leaders. The British were the opposite. They were not only irreligious, they sneered at religion. They sneered at the Christian values of the colonists. And I said, I've never really known this before. I've never seen this before, that the British elites were tremendously decadent and corrupt and cynical. So it's just like a culture war, two dramatically different cultures.
One of the things I was really it's so heartwarming. In your book, you talked about that this revolution was fought by farmers, ordinary people that you just ragtag militia who put it all on the line, made the sacrifices for the freedom that we have today.
There's no doubt about it. And that tells you something. Who were these people willing to fight, and what were they fighting for? And again, I was astonished by the biblical literacy. I mean, all these folks knew the Bible, even the ones that, were not the most religious. They all knew it. It was part of the culture. Very dramatically different from England. England was pretty openly godless. One of the things that I noticed too is that in fighting the war, the British were barbaric. They were like the Japanese or the Nazis in World War II, barbaric to their enemies. The Americans were really noble in the way they treated their enemies. They were like openly Christian in the way they treated their enemies. I mean, you're my enemy and I'm going to, take you prisoner, but I will treat you the way I would want to be treated if I were your prisoner. That's radical faith. And I'd never known that, how stern George Washington was in charging his officers with treating the others this way or in fighting this way. He would not allow our side to stoop to what the British were doing. The British were barbaric. They did things that, again, I never knew any of this. They were oftentimes the Americans would surrender and the British would bayonet them to death. They wouldn't say, okay, surrender. We have these rules that we'll put you in a prison. No, they would bayonet them to death in many cases. It's incredible. And then when they did imprison them, the prison conditions were so horrifying. I didn't really even want to write about it much because it's so disturbing, but it was virtually a death sentence when they imprisoned them. The Americans were just the opposite. The Americans were committed to fighting in a noble way. And so if you want to know who are the good guys, the bad guys, it's pretty clear. The Americans are the good guys here. They would not cede the moral ground, the moral high ground. They said, we're going to do this, what we think is God's way. I had not heard that. And again, if I hadn't done all the research myself, I would say somebody's trying to give me a religious version of the revolution. It's not. This is the true story. And most of us haven't heard it.
Eric Metaxas, we're going to come back with some final thoughts here on the Armstrong-Williams Show. Author of Revolution. Don't go away. And welcome back to the broadcast. Eric, what concerns you the most about the future of the American experiment?
Well, it's kind of funny. You ask an author of a book like this. I mean, the reason I wrote the book is if people don't know what's in my book, you can't be America if you don't know your story. If you don't understand where your liberties come from and why people died for these liberties. If you take that for granted, it just goes away. And it's been going away in our lifetime. We've seen that. The less people know this stuff, Benjamin Franklin famously, said it's a republic, madam, if you can keep it. You and I have a responsibility to keep the republic, to know the stories, all of this stuff. This is on the test. This is not extra credit. This is central for every American. And so my concern, or I should say my answer to the concern is writing this book. I said, I want to put all this stuff in one book that's readable, that's fun to read, but that tells you everything you need to know, because you do need to know it. As Americans, we need to know this. Most of us, maybe we heard it in school and forgot it, or maybe we never heard it. This is central, is knowing this in the same way that the men of this revolution, they knew this stuff backwards and forwards. They knew where our rights come from and why that is, and what the Bible says about liberty, and about all of this stuff was very important to them. So we need to know their names, know their stories. There's some heroes, Nathan Hale, Henry Knox, many names.
I want to remind you in less than a minute and 30 seconds of something you said. When I think about the days in the beginning of Genesis and when God brought the Israelites out of Egypt, and they saw all the miracles, the separating of the Red Sea and Jordan, and all the miracles. And it seems as though our greatest liability is forgetfulness,
Yes.
because the further they moved away from God, the miracles became fantasy.
Yes.
It became something that entertained people. And when you talk about the founders and the faith, not only in believing in God and saying God is our king and how they treated their enemy, it seems as though the further we move away from God, the more strife, the more chaos that we face. Because our issues are not always this spiritual illness. Sometimes it's not always policy. Oftentimes it's spiritual illnesses, this disconnection from the creator.
That's at the center of everything we're talking about, what you just said. And frankly, George Washington said over and over again that they saw miracles during the revolution. They never should have won, but God intervened. God is an active God in history. That's George Washington's view. It's the view of many of them. And how can you call George Washington a deist? It's so preposterous. This lie that's been pushed on us, this narrative, all the fact they were all deists, French Enlightenment. Absolutely untrue, demonstrably, preposterously untrue. We need to know the truth. These were men of faith who lived their faith. They saw miracles. They talked about it. Again, my book is not about that, but it's just everywhere you look. It's not escapable. And I think that Americans simply need to know this, and that's the way forward. If we know this, we're not going to be who we've been. We're going to be the kind of people that take this seriously.
How does someone go out and get a copy of your book?
People can get it absolutely anywhere. My only request is get it quickly, because it's kind of like a movie opening weekend. If it doesn't do well immediately, they don't carry it, in stores. And I feel that this really is important. I think people will love these stories. Some of them are funny and beautiful, and I just feel like it's a moment for us at our 250th, to say, okay, I need to revisit this. This is the time. This summer, I need to revisit this stuff, and we will be a different nation. People will understand that you cannot have the liberties that we take for granted without the God of the Bible. And by the way, once I know that, I'm not going to take the liberties for granted. We've got to take that seriously. We have a debt to those who've suffered and died so that we can be free to have conversations like this.
Eric Metaxas, thank you so much, author of Revolution. It's just I don't know if I've ever talked to one in recent memory who shared things about our history and our founding and our faith journey more so than you. Thank you for doing the research, the heavy lifting, and writing this book, especially in the year of our 250th anniversary founding. God bless you, and we wish you well. I'm Armstrong Williams.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. And I encourage you, go out and get a copy of Revolution by Eric Metaxas. I'm Armstrong Williams.